All right, welcome. This is Scrum versus Kanban. My name is Seth Kessel. I am a student at Georgia College and State University in their Masters of MIS program, Masters of Management Information Systems, and I also work as a Scrum Master for a company called Raffle Systems. I've been doing Scrum stuff for a couple years now. I've also worked as a product owner, and I've worked in both Kanban and Scrum. And today we will talk about the differences, different kinds of implementations, maybe some real world examples, and just kind of give you guys a brief overview of everything that goes on in Scrum and Kanban. So let's get started. So, what is Scrum? How does it work? Right? Let's look at this diagram. I have this picture here that kind of tells you sort of where we get the word Scrum from. So, Scrum is actually a term from rugby where the two teams, the players on both sides, are fighting over the ball, right? They're coming together to get the ball to start gameplay. So in Scrum, we've stolen that idea of coming together and we use that idea to say, hey, we're coming together. We're going to go develop our features to deliver um, useful product to our customers, any value that we can deliver to our customers, and we'll do it together. So we've stolen that word. So we'll get into this diagram. I have a diagram of kind of the overview of Scrum. We'll talk to you about the three roles, the three artifacts, and the five ceremonies. So the three roles we'll start here. You can see those people in the Scrum team, right? So the red is the development team. That includes quality assurance, the QA team, and then also involves the dev manager, the development manager, their link to HR and all of that, and they also connect them toward all that. A product owner, which you'll see theoretically in green here, is the person who is in charge of what the team works on. They prioritize the backlog, and we'll get into what that is in a second. But they are also the link to the stakeholders and like theoretically, for example, a product manager or the actual customers, and they'll be the ones that will filter in their requests, kind of make sure that they don't overload the team, and also it actually involves that particular team's skill set. And then you've got the third person, the third link, the Scrum Master. And here, I like to think of it as blue because Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org, where I got this image from, generally thinks everything is blue. So Scrum Master is generally blue on this. So Scrum Master is responsible for managing the process. They manage how the team works, not what the team works on. They're an advocate for the team to break down roadblocks, and they also make sure that the team is following the rules of Scrum. So Scrum is broken down into five ceremonies, and every team works and fits those ceremonies into sprints. Sprints are intervals of work before, and that's how we schedule our ceremonies around that time. So there's sprints. They're generally 2 to 4 weeks. They generally, a lot of companies like two. Two is really the magic number. Anything above four is you're getting into too long, which is one of the issues with Kanban that we'll talk about later. Too short, you just don't have any time to actually iterate and create new work. So 2 weeks, golden rule, right? So we've got in terms of ceremonies, we've got sprint retrospective, we've got the sprint review, we've got the daily scrum, we've got uh, backlog refinement, and sprint planning. So let's talk about backlog refinement as we talk about the backlog. So backlog refinement is meant to refine and make sure that the backlog is up to date. The backlog is the list of all items that are ready to go into any sprint. They're prioritized from top to bottom. They're broken down into different types of uh, features. So story, generally it is story, task, feature defect, bug, spike. So the five general ones. There's, every company's got their own things. Epics kind of or whatever it falls into under themes for the whole workload. So like stories, all those five different pieces, the stories, the tasks, the spikes, the bugs, the feature defects will fit generally underneath an epic. But that's not as important for what we're talking about here. So that's a topic of discussion for a different time. But the product backlog is the list of all the stories and other features that are pointed and refined and ready to go into the sprint. and they go into the sprint via the backlog, right? So um, anything that's ready to go is in the sprint, is in the backlog. You've got sprint planning. We talked about that as a ceremony, right? Sprint planning is the time for the team to estimate how much they can get done in the current sprint based off of people who, how many developers they have not sprint, because people go on vacation, right? Things happen, people aren't around, people get sick. So they plan for what they want to work on the next sprint. They can always add in more. The general rule of thumb is under promise, over deliver. So this is where the team decides to on what they're going to work on for the sprint. And all of those things go into the sprint backlog, which is one of the three artifacts that we'll talk about today, which are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and increment. But in the sprint backlog, right, we have everything that is to do and hasn't been started yet for the current sprint. Generally, when people say the sprint backlog, they also mean anything at all that's in the sprint, but anything that gets done in the sprint gets added to the product increment. Product increment is just a list simply of everything that has been completed by the team slash for the actual product that they're building for. So any features or any value that has been added to that product. Excuse me. The daily scrum is a time for the team. So it's 15 minutes as the general rule, right? Scrum is very adamant about not going over time allotted. So the daily scrum is time for everybody to come and talk to each other and just kind of go over everything that's going on. And then finally, the last two are the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. The sprint review is the time for the team to present to stakeholders everything that they've done, finished, learned, whatever that has provided any kind of value to the customer. And also to tell them what didn't necessarily go right. And then you've got the last piece, right, which is the sprint retrospective, which is the time for the team to look back at the end of the sprint, everything they could have done better, what they did really well, action items off of what they could have done better, and then I like to, as a scrum master, kind of give the people time to brag about other people. So like, hey, kudos, this person did awesome, right? So it's just a time for everybody to look back. Bear in mind, all of this stuff happens within that 2 week period. And so now we're getting Kanban, right? So what is Kanban? Kanban is another form of agile methodology that is very unstructured, right? There's no sprints, there's no set times for all of these meetings, right? They have a daily, and that's about it. So you look here, this is the picture I have up here is an actual Kanban board. It's a very simplified one. A lot of the time they will have more statuses than just this, but this is a very simplified one to give you a basic idea. So here is a Kanban board again, right? So you got your backlog, everything that you've got in your backlog is stuff that you can bring in whenever. There's no sprint. The only cutoff is when you've decided, hey, after we finish this particular piece, after the story, after this whatever value added piece, we are going to look back and go through all of our different ceremonies that we've got. So they have a lot of the same ceremonies, and we'll get into that in a second. But you got to know here, really, Kanban is just a watered down version of Scrum. There's no sprint retrospective. There's a retrospective on the work. There's no sprint planning because everything can just be continuously worked on. This is what a lot of developers really, really want before they understand how helpful Scrum can be. But you still got your product owner, instead of a Scrum Master, you've got an Agile coach, and you still got your development manager and your development team. Everything is just slightly different named. So now we can get into where they actually differ. I've got this. This is my favorite image that I use to explain to people. I've done like on conferences was what we called it. But like I've done discussions based off of the differences and where they can go. So if you look here, right, you've got on the left, you've got your Scrum. On your right, you've got your Kanban. This is a little cheat sheet. And if you look, what I was talking about before, you look at D on the right side. So there's numbers on the left and letters on the right. D is that cutoff. It's that time that you're saying after this, we are not going to do any more until we've gone through our demo and our retrospective. Sprint reviews are also the time for demos, right? H is in replacement of number 6, the sprint review, and retrospective is the same as the sprint retrospective. It's just these are because there's no sprints, they don't happen as often. They happen when the team decides they need it. And so in a perfect world, both of these work just fine. But it's harder to keep track of everything in Kanban. You've got a pull methodology in Kanban where everything is like pulled in as ready to be worked on from the backlog, and you've got a push methodology from the Scrum side where you're pushing everything into the sprint, you're putting everything into the sprint, and then you're only pulling in what you need if you've got time to do so. So it's just structure versus unstructured. But yeah, that's basically a good overview of the two. If you would like the link to this cheat sheet, just comment on the video and we'll get it there. All right. Thank you very much.